Welcome to Old White Merc Guy. Today we're going to do something a little different. Usually we'd be doing outboard motor stuff. I've been working on a couple different cars and I've looked for videos to figure out what basically to figure out compression on a motor that I want to put together. The title, I'm probably going to have Cleveland in there. However, this basically works for anything as far as I know. So I thought, I didn't see any videos. I was trying to figure out compression ratios and deck height. I didn't see any videos out there per se that would help me figure out what I'm looking at. In other words, I'll pick a piston and I'm looking at it, and then you can look, say you're on Summit Racing or and it'll show, like, you can go through the comments and sometimes you'll find somebody will say, oh, I've got a 71 Cleveland with 2 barrel heads, whatever, and with these pistons, what would the compression ratio be? And you'll somebody will try to get you in the ballpark. But if you're putting together a motor, and in this case I got a block 351 Cleveland block, it happens to be a 72, and I wanted to know where the piston would sit in the deck, because usually when I have a block done, you can just have it bored, and I guess you could tell them, take 10 thousandths off the deck to make sure that it's nice and flat, it's not warped or anything like that. But that all computes into what you get for a compression ratio. So I wanted to find out, how can I find out where the piston, whichever piston I'm looking at, sits in the deck, and what do I have for room there? What if I want to zero the deck? That's something a lot of guys are doing. Actually, when I used to oval track race, that was one of the things we were allowed to do. We had to run a flat top piston, but you could cut the deck so it was zero. So basically the piston sat right at the top of the deck. That was just a couple of the rules there, but yeah, like you couldn't have the piston coming out of the deck or anything, out of the block, so to speak. So I figured I'd do a video on this that would point the average guy in the direction to figure out what your deck height is, where the piston is in relation to the deck height. Then you can look at the specs on a piston, and then that'll help you compute what the compression ratio is. I'm pretty sure there's a way you can do this on a calculator as far as computing the compression. I'm almost sure I've seen guys do that. However, what I do is I'll just go on Summit. I'm looking at some pistons anyways. I would assume Jegs has it too, but and probably some other places. But we'll use Summit as an example. I'll be looking at a certain piston, and then you can get down to a certain point. It'll say calculate compression, and then you can put your information in there, and you can come up with roughly what your compression ratio is going to be. However, on that block that you fill out, they want to know what your deck height is. So we'll get into that real quick. One thing I wanted to mention, I said that this motor is a 72, so on a Ford, probably a lot of guys watching this video are going to know, but there's always going to be people who don't know. And you can usually find reference, and I'll show you after. You can find some type of reference as to what year it was. For Fords, if it says like C, you'll find like, say it says C and then 8. So C would represent the 60s. So C would be 60s, and then D would be 70s, E would be the 80s, and so on. Well, I don't know when they stopped doing that, but in my case, the block says D2. So that tells me the block is a 72. The heads that I have are 2-barrel open chamber heads. Those are D1, so they're 71 heads. There's no reason for me to believe this motor's ever been apart, so they're probably just left over. I think unless they change something, sometimes they don't change that number, but anyway, the heads are 71 open chamber, the blocks 72. And then there's a lot of things out there about Clevelands, and there's some confusion. So you got the Cleveland, which was made from 70 to 74, so that's 5 years. And what killed it was basically emissions. I think they had to kind of come in on emissions, how the motor was burning, but also they were dropping the octane on the fuel. I was just talking to a guy, a customer, a few weeks back, and he was mentioning how he worked at a gas station. He remembers you could get, and you didn't call it super back then. I believe you just called it premium, as I recall. And premium was like 102 or 104 octane. I had a 65 Ford with a 390 in it that had the owner's manual in it, and it for the, I forget which 390 it would be, it was like 330 horse or something. It said you had to run like 100 octane fuel. So back then, pulled up to the pump. Now you're running around looking for racing fuel. But anyway, so the Cleveland was made from 70 to 74. And then basically what killed it, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but it just was built more for the idea of racing than it was to be an everyday motor, like say comparable 351 Windsor. So 74 was last year. However, from my understanding, Windsor, 351 Windsor, the plant, they couldn't keep up with production for all these cars that Ford was building. So Ford came up with the idea that, I guess ahead of time, this is why I say it doesn't make sense to me. They came out with the 351 modified, or M motor. If you put the two of them side by side, they look the same. It's the same heads basically, same valve covers, but there are differences, and that's the one part I don't understand. They still had big ports on them, the Cleveland 2-barrel heads. It's still a pretty good sized port. Why did they do that? I don't know. It just, I kind of wish they kept the Cleveland run. The only thing, and, oh, by the way, before I forget, the Cleveland, the 351 Cleveland was made also in Australia up into the 80s. And my understanding too is a lot of the blocks had a higher nickel content. They were actually a nicer block. They also had a 2-barrel closed chamber head that was offered in Australia. To the best of my knowledge, that was never offered in the United States. So to go back to the 351M motor, basic difference was the deck was taller. So your V, the deck was quite a bit taller. And so the intake manifold is different. You can't put, say, a 2-barrel closed chamber intake or a 4-barrel closed chamber. A 4-barrel intake on a 351M. It won't fit because the deck is taller, so the V is further out. It's kind of like this would be a Cleveland, this would be the M motor. So that's one difference. The other difference, and this is probably part of the scenario as to why they did it, the bell housing is different on the 351M motor. It would take a big block, say a 429 or a 460. It's the same bolt pattern as 429, 460, the 351M, and also the 400, which actually I believe came out also in 70. Now on the 400, same idea, the deck's taller. The stroke, instead of being 3.50, is 4.00. And unfortunately, the journals are different. So, and unfortunately for us Ford guys, You couldn't take a 400 crank and put it in a 351 and stroke it to be actually a little more than a 383, I believe. But yeah, we couldn't do that like the Chevy guys can, or de-stroke a 400, which Chevy guys can do. That's a bit of a bummer. And the 400, I don't know. It was a low compression motor. It never really got a lot of love, so to speak. I always kind of wanted to build one, but one of the reasons I'm bringing up the 400 though is because there was a lot of guys, way more guys than I would have thought, that are restoring an old 75 F-150 or a 79 F-150 or whatever, or 250. A lot of those motors had the 350, a lot of those trucks rather had the 351M or the 400. And if you want to keep the truck original, I mean, you could go stuff in a 460 in there. But if you're looking to keep the truck to the way it was, or hey, you're a low budget guy like myself, say you don't have an engine hoist or whatever the case may be, or you don't want to go through finding a 460, building a 460, so on and so forth. Again, some people want to keep the truck original, or in some cases a car, because these motors did find their way into some cars. I've seen some like 78 Thunderbirds with a 351M in it, and I believe definitely a 400. So I'm sure there's a lot more for them today, but back in my day, back in the 80s, I had a 79 Bronco with a 351M, and you were kind of limited to what you could do. You were probably looking at putting on the camshaft. It should be the same, I believe, 99% sure, is the same as a 351 Cleveland. So cams, you had a choice. So you could put a RV type, towing type cam in there. You could put headers on it. Edelbrock made a performer intake, so you could put a 4-barrel on it, because all 351Ms and the 400s were all 2-barrel motors. There might have been a few 1974 barrel ones that I supposedly heard of, but I've never seen one. So, and of course the 400 with having the same bolt pattern as a 460 for the bell housing. As far as swapping it, makes it a little easier, because the 460 or 429 will bolt right up to that transmission. And then there were some guys who would talk about putting, you know, oh, get a closed chamber, set of closed chamber 4-barrel heads and put them on the 400. Well, it's not as easy as it sounds. Back then, I mean, the valves were quite a bit bigger. The 4-barrels had 219 intakes, 171 exhaust. So it could, you never know, it could be an issue. You know, you wouldn't want a piston hitting a valve. The 2-barrels were 2.05 on the intake, 165 exhaust. So it'd be cool. I mean, if you could put a closed chamber 4-barrel head on a 400, there were some positives to that. One, you're gonna bring the compression up to roughly 9.5, close to 10 to 1, somewhere in that ballpark. The other thing is, the 400 being a longer stroke, those 4-barrel heads, I mean, they got huge ports on them, so theoretically it should work better on a 400 than it would a 351 Cleveland. And the 400s were torque-wise, where, you know, you could put one on a 400 together and have it be a pretty torquey motor. The problem with the 4-barrel heads is nobody offered an intake that I know in today's world, I didn't research it, but I don't know if there's one in today's world or not. And in today's world, you probably wouldn't go that route. But back then, you'd have to take, say, the 4-barrel intake, weld material onto the intake ports, have someone machine it, because you got to remember the deck's further out. I mean, the heads are further apart. So to make that 4-barrel intake work, to match the 4-barrel heads, the ports, that's what you used to have to do. Weld material on there, have someone machine it. You could make it work. In today's world, if it were me, and I was building a 400 because I had, you know, an old Bronco or something, I would look into maybe something like the Edelbrock Performer heads. The They're aluminum. You lose some weight there. They flow good. They've got a 60 cc combustion chamber. So I mean, your compression ratio is gonna be up where you could probably run super unleaded with no problem. That's one option. Or you could run the 2-barrel heads, and I believe if you put in flat top pistons in those old motors, I'd want to double check that, but I think you could put flat tops in it, and that would put you up close to 10-1, and just run your regular 2-barrel heads. So I mainly wanted to talk about this Cleveland we're building, and like I say, getting the deck height and all that. So, but I just wanted to touch on the 400. That's so Windsor's, they couldn't, evidently the plant was having a hard time keeping up with the demand, so they brought out the 351M motor and started putting that in trucks. And then actually, when you think about it, the 351M, the 400, 429, 460 all have the same bolt pattern. So I guess basically, if a truck's coming down, in production, that's mainly what they put in a lot of these trucks. There was a lot of 6 cylinders in them too, because around 78 and 9, 80, I remember the shop we worked at, we had 1, 2, 3, 4. I worked at the garage back then. We had 4 F-150s. 3 of them were the 306, and 1 had the 351M. A lot of that, I think, had to do with the gas crisis of '79. So people were, fuel, price went up and gas went up in price. I started driving it with 60-something cents a gallon. It was shortly thereafter that it went up to whatever it was, $2 or something, which is a big jump. So a lot of people buying vehicles, they started looking at something more economical. They started looking at, as far as trucks go, the 306 is a good motor. So that was really common in the early 80s. And then you started seeing more, at some point, 83, 84, somewhere near, the Windsors became more common. They must have started beefing up how many they were making or something. Anyway, let's take a look at this 4 deck height so we can figure out how to put this together. Hopefully I can get this so we can read this pretty decent. So I should pull this chair over here. This is what we got here. You'll see I got deck height written here. So these are going to be things you're going to need to find. So I got half of the stroke. On the Cleveland, the stroke is 3.50, so half of that is 1.75. We need to know our rod length. So on the rod length, it's 5.780. So I wrote that over here. Pin height. On this particular 2 different pistons that I'm going to compare, both happen to be this, but 1.647. So we got that in this column here. The pin height. Now, if you're not sure what you have for a pin height, when you look up the piston that you might be looking at, whether it be a flat top, dish piston, whatever the case may be, it will be listed in that listing. I'll actually show you. I didn't write everything down, but I did write a lot of the stuff that was listed for the pistons that I'm looking at. So now we're over here. So we take the half our stroke, 175. There's our rod. Pin height. You add it up, come up with 9.177. Okay. Now if you look up, say a 351 Cleveland, on most of them, if not all, but the deck from the factory is 9.206.
You could basically Google that. What's the deck height on a 351 Cleveland? So here you got 9.206. So we're going to subtract, actually I got it here. We're going to subtract 9.177, which is a number we got from this here. And we're going to come up with 0.029. So the piston, with this piston I'm looking at, it would be down in the block. When you bring the piston up to top dead center, so to speak, you're going to have 29 thousandths clearance. Basically, from the top of the piston to the deck, or to the top of the block. The block I got was line board and decked. We'll talk about that when we get up to the block. And so when he cut the deck, I was kind of hoping around 20 thousandths, but he did it at 16 thousandths right here. So we're going to deduct the 16 thousandths from the 29. We come up with 13 thousandths. So that's what the deck is now, with whichever piston of these two pistons I decide to go with. So now let's look at this. Hopefully this is showing up okay. The one piston I'm looking at is a Wiseco. Right here. It's for 30 over 4.030. The bore is 4.000, but this motor's 30 over. These pistons run about $800 with the rings. They're forged pistons, one valve relief. Here's that compression height I was telling you. See, when I look up this piston, it'll give you this information. There's that 1.647. This is a crucial one here. Piston head volume, CC. This Wiseco is plus 3.00. And this one was crucial to me. Piston ring thickness, a 1/16 on the top ring, 1/16 on the second ring, and then 3/16 on your oil ring. So that's the Wiseco. Here's the Speed Pro, which I can get these, looks like $490. You got two valve reliefs. It's forged. Actually, when you look at the top of this piston, it looks just like the factory flat head for the two-barrel motors. The four-barrel, I think, had a slight dish to some of them. But let's see, here's your compression height. Happens to be the same as the Wiseco, 1.647. Piston head volume plus 1.50. Remember, this one on the Wiseco is 3.00. I'm going to explain that in a second. And this one I don't really care for. This is old school stuff right here. Piston ring thickness, 5/64, and then your oil ring. So, a couple of things I would like to mention about this is this was a little confusing to me when I saw this. So for you guys that play around with motors and have played around, and for those of you who might be looking at doing something, the piston that was in this block that I took apart, which actually I could show you one, had two valve reliefs in it. The Wiseco has one valve relief in it. The reason that caught my attention is with the one valve relief, theoretically, you would think you get the compression up higher. Instead of two notches in the piston, you have one. But if that is the case as far as making compression, if that's true in theory when you look at it,
But yet, when I look at the piston head volume on the Wiseco, it's plus 3.00. That number should be lower. Actually, you would think it would match or be lower than what the Speed Pro piston was, which was plus 1.50. So the lower that number, the higher the compression ratio should be. So I was a little confused. I was like, wait a minute. I'm willing to pay the extra money for this piston, but in my estimation, the Wiseco and the motor builder I deal with, he said the same thing. You know, the Wiseco is probably the better, is the better piston, but I'm gonna pay more for it. Well, I don't mind if it's gonna get the compression to the goal of where I want to be, which is roughly 9.5 to 1. But what I found out is that it's actually gonna hurt me. It's going to be a little harder to get that 9.5 1 with the Wiseco. I know it smells and looks like BS, but you know, to me, old school, 1 valve relief versus 2 valve reliefs, this one should make more compression. But what it is that Wiseco with that 1 valve relief, that valve relief has got to be quite a bit deeper than the reliefs on the Speed Pro piston. So in other words, if I was running a high lift cam, I've got a chance of having more clearance with the Wiseco piston than I do the Speed Pro piston. I'm not going to be running the big cam, but that's basically what I think I'm looking at with this 1 valve relief, is that valve relief is cut deeper for clearance. Another thing, and there's videos out there. There's some videos out there about a lot of these new motors, or if you get into racing motors, these guys are running really, really thin rings. And evidently there's a new way too that they're honing the blocks for these rings. And on a fairly, don't quote me on this, but on a higher horsepower motor, I forget exactly what the numbers were, but the guy that was talking about this, they had a motor, his dad was a NASCAR racer, and they had a motor that had been sitting for 20 years, and anyway, they went to they freshened it up, whatever. Let's say it was making like 750 horsepower. Then they put in these different pistons, they got the thinner rings, they honed it differently. There could be 1 or 2 other things that went along with this factor, but basically all they changed on that motor was the pistons. And like I say, they're talking millimeters on these rings. That thing went from something like 750 horsepower to like 830. I mean, like an 80 horsepower increase. That is incredible, absolutely incredible. The other thing they're finding is that the motors last longer because you don't get the wear and tear on the cylinder walls. It also runs, the oil was running cooler, was another thing. It all makes sense because back in the day when you ran a 5/64 ring, say it's a fairly thick ring. You got 2 of them in there. They're rubbing up against the cylinder walls. That creates drag, friction, heat, and wear and tear on your cylinder walls. Basically, you pull an old motor apart and you've got that lip in there. I see a lot of these newer fuel injected motors that I'll pull them apart with 100,000 miles on them. They virtually are more, and they virtually have no lip on it. I thought it had a lot to do with the fuel injection, and I still think it does to a degree. But I'm starting to believe too that a lot of it has to do with these thinner piston rings that they're running. So, as far as I showed you the specs on these 2 pistons, and so the one thing I didn't like was the plus 3.00 cc on the Wiseco. The compression is going to be a little bit lower. But what I do love is the rings are 1/16. On the Speed Pro, I get a little more compression, but it's got the 5/64 rings size. And you can get, back in the day, I don't think you could get them for that. Now, I mean, I'm sure for quite some time. It's been a while since I've been playing around with this stuff. You can get Marley rings for it. This price on the Speed Pro I said was $490, and that doesn't come with the rings, but I think you find rings for 60 or so dollars for a set. But I kind of want to stay away from that thicker ring. I really like the thinner ring with the Wiseco. It appears that it'll be less wear and tear on the motor. I did see somewhere on a lower horsepower motor, obviously when you get into the ring differences, the lower horsepower you're not going to see as big a gain as you would on a 750 or 800 horse motor. But I did see a reference as to roughly 8 horsepower difference between these two ring sizes. Roughly, we'll say 8 horsepower increase on the one with the thinner ring. So yeah, they're more money. The compression's gonna be a little lower. We can pick that up to a degree. There's ways of doing that. So that's where we're at there. Now, let me show you what we're looking at as far as getting our compression. So like I said, you could go on the Summit, look up a piston. As you scroll down past the comments and stuff, watch for it. I think there's two sections, and you'll see compression calculator. And if any of you've ever used it, when I started playing around with it, I was like, what the heck am I doing wrong? You just got to be careful with the zeros and the points. It'll make it totally different. You could punch in certain information and then hit it, and it says you got like 2.0 compression when you know it's got to be closer to 9 or 10. So what did I do wrong? So it's all in the decimal points, guys. And took me a minute, but I finally figured it out, what I was doing wrong. So let's take a look at this. This is where we're at here. All right, compression right here. So on the left here, I'm gonna do the Wiseco. So just pretend this is your box that you're gonna fill out the information and for the piston on the Summit site I was just talking about. So the bore, it's going to ask you this, and it's just as well you put it in there, because this is also going to tell you what your cubic inch is. So our bore is 4.030. It's going to ask you the stroke. This is 3.50. It's going to ask you what your cylinder head is. You should be able to look this up online, no problem. But in my case, our 2-barrel head is a 76cc combustion chamber. Effective dome volume, that's what I was showing you over here, right here, plus 3.00. So right here you punch in that box, plus 3.00. When we figured out our deck, guys, way up here, we came up with 13 thousandths. That's why we had to do it, because they want to know what the deck clearance is. Our case, our block is going to be 0.013. Compressed gasket thickness is 0, and you got to punch it in, 0.040. 40 thousandths. And then, of course, number of cylinders. So the compression came out to a lousy, this is with the Wiseco, compression came out with a lousy 9.12 to 1. I failed to mention too, these factory Clevelands back in the day, I've seen a couple different listings, but we'll say the one book, the Ford book I got, says 9 to 1, and to be honest with you, it doesn't necessarily even say that. It says 9 to 1 after you plane a certain amount of material off the head. So I mean, I don't even think they were quite 9 to 1, which is horrible. Now, of course, 4-barrel motor is totally different deal. So we came up with 9.12. If we cut the head down to 74 cc's, brings it up to 9.3 to 1. And this is my goal that I was shooting for, 9.5 to 1. I would need to have roughly a 72 cc head. If I look at the Speed Pro over here, same information except for this plus 1.50.
Everything else is the same. Look at the difference from 912 to 9.26, 9.3 to 9.45, and a 72cc would be 9.66 from that 9.5 number. So you can see where I was making reference to what I was shooting for, which I'm comfortable at 9.5 to 1 with super unleaded. I think I'd be okay. Should be okay. I've heard some guys going as high as 10. Chamber design starts to come into play with some of that in my book, but anyway, I wouldn't be comfortable with 10 to 1. As a matter of fact, while I think about this, I want to bring this up. It probably won't happen. It's going to depend on how work goes over the next couple of months. I'd like to get either one of these cars going. You've probably seen it. Oh, thank you guys for all the views, comments, thumbs up, stuff like that on our 72 Gran Torino video. It's, last I looked, it was over 6,500 views, which for a little channel like me is really, really, really thankful for that. And hopefully a lot of you like the video. I'm working to try to get the videos a little better. But I would love to go to Ford Fest. I think it might be called Holly Ford Fest, but either way, Ford Fest, which I believe is in Bowling, Kentucky, somewhere around September 26th. I'd really like to go with my two boys, and I got a good friend of mine. I was mentioning it to him. He kind of is interested in going too. I'd love to go. They got I watch videos that guys do that have been out there. They got a drag strip. You have burnout competition. They got a road course thing that they set up. Whether I'd be able to do any of that, I don't know. I don't know if this is for everybody. If you got to be somewhat invited or be a big YouTube guy, you know. But either way, I'd still like to go. Check out Swap Meet, car show. I mean, I'd love to check it out. It's a little bit of a ride for us, about 1,000 miles, but I would just love to do something like that with my two boys. I think it'd be a good time. And so, anyway, I got to get one of them hopefully ready to go, whether it be the Cougar or the Torino. So one of the things I wanted to bring up, one of the reasons I'm bringing that up, is I watch a lot of YouTube videos, and I've seen where guys are like, yeah, they pull into the gas station and they only have like 90 or 91 octane. Around here where I live, which is western Massachusetts, we got 93. Connecticut's got 93. I don't usually pay much attention. I usually the vehicles I'm driving, they put 87 in them. But I found that a little concerning, that I could be in a whole different area if I was doing a road trip of some kind or vacation or something. That could potentially be a problem in my book. If 93 and I got the motor set up to run on 93 and I can only in some areas get 89 or 91, I mean, yeah, you can back the timing down, but at any rate, I don't know if anyone's ever really thought about that or mentioned that before, but I've definitely seen that in some videos where I pulled up and was like, oh, they only have 91. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up. We talked about the head CC a little bit. I'm sure most of you, again, this is probably all old school stuff, but for some guys that might not know, turn the head over, you see the chamber. I've seen a guy use like a piece of glass with a hole drilled in it. Use basically like some type of hypodermic type needle that you can measure the CCs, fill up the chamber and fill it up to the top, see what it takes for liquid to come up with what CC the head is. Now, that's fine if you're just looking to see what yours is. I would dare say more than likely you can look it up. A lot of these old motors, you never know, did somebody plane 20 thousandths off of them? You're not really going to know that. So it would be helpful there. I would dare say if you're going to have something done, more than likely you're going to have a machine shop, do some work, maybe, you know, touch up the valves, whatever, do a valve job. You know, they can find this stuff out for you.
I'll show you this. So I was saying how 76 cc, 74, 72 cc when we were figuring compression ratio. So this is just a ballpark, guys. Kind of give us some type of idea. See if we can read that. There we go. So roughly my Cleveland head should be roughly 76 cc's. 8 to 12 thousandths equals about 1 cc. Now obviously all heads are a little different if you're going to mill them, so these numbers are just really a ballpark figure. So I just try to get an idea where I want to be at. I went in the middle with 10. So if I cut 20 thousandths, theoretically, if 10 is 1 cc, I cut 20 thousandths off, which isn't a big deal. That puts us at a 74 cc head, give or take. To get where I wanted to be, I wanted to be at 72 cc's roughly to make the compression work, so we cut 40 thousandths off. I have a note here, might have to cut intake. So theoretically, it looks like we could take 40 thousandths off the head, get it to around 72 cc's. My engine builder is going to be the guy that's going to let me know for sure on that. We could try to find a thinner head gasket, but I haven't seen much under 38. I know some old track motors I had in the past. We used to just run a thin steel head gasket. I think those might have been around 36 thousandths. And they were a pain in the butt because you torque the thing down and you run the motor for whatever, say a couple hours or whatever, run it for one race is what I think I would do. And then when I get home, I'd retorque all the head bolts because you'd have to retorque them after you ran it. This note on here might have to cut intake. The reason I wrote that, I don't know where the cutoff mark is as far as resurfacing the head, bringing the cc's down. You've cut the deck on the block, and I use this as a, let's say this is the stock 351 Cleveland deck. Now you got the deck cut, now you got the heads cut, everything's down lower. So when our intake goes on there, I'm not sure how many thousandths you can take off before you actually have to mill the intake, so it sits down in between the heads where it's supposed to, so to speak. I gotta find out about that. But that's what I'm looking at. To get my desired 9.5 compression, I think I'm gonna see if I can get the heads cut roughly 40 thousandths, get it in that 72 cc ballpark. And that'll give me that 9.5 to 1, because I am gonna go with the Wiseco pistons. They're supposed to be a better piston. Yeah, they're more money. They got the smaller ring. In theory, a motor should last longer. It's not like it's a daily driver, but still, in theory, it should last longer. Less wear and tear on the cylinder walls, is my understanding. And they'll actually make a little more horsepower than the 564 ring pistons. So, in theory, that's the way it all looks. So I'm gonna go with that. I think I can leave this here, but I'm gonna take this pen. I'll just show you a couple of things here, and then call it good. Let me see. I got to hit. All right. So hopefully it's gonna show up right. It is really bright and sunny here. This is our 2-barrel head. You'll notice this combustion chamber here. You'll notice, hopefully you can see, this is open in here. This is recessed, I should say. And the same right in here. This is recessed. It's a 205 intake, 165 exhaust. And then we're gonna look at this one. Now, this one's not as clean, but this one is a 4-barrel head. Oh, that reminds me. Hopefully this number shows up. I'm not sure. It looks like it does.
you'll see it says D0. So that's a 70. And this one is, boy, this sun is horrible. Right here, this one says D1. So this is 71. The chamber on this one, let me see if I can move over a little bit. This might be better. Okay, so hopefully this is better. You'll see here by the plug, this is flat even with the head surface, whereas this one is recessed down. So you could probably see the line right here where the pen is recessed down in there. So this is flush. Also on the other side, this here is flush with the head, and this is open down in here. I virtually can run this right across here like that. Whereas this one, I was looking at the wrong side on this 4-barrel head. This is flush here, this is flat with the, whereas this one's recessed. And then also this is recessed, while this one, like I was showing you, is, there we go, it's closed off. So they did this on the 429 and 460 heads also, and here lies part of the problem. These heads with this closed chamber like this make more compression, obviously, and they actually, if you went compression for compression, let's say this motor's 10-1, this motor's 10-1. This one has less chance of pinging. And the reason that is because the way the fuel burns in here, with this being closed off, when there's a flame, when there's the flame, it tends to, how do we say it, it goes out, it doesn't completely burn. Okay, that's the best way to put it. It doesn't completely burn, so therefore this cylinder, in theory, doesn't get as hot as this cylinder. This head, or this closed chamber design, also doesn't do very well on the emissions machine, and I worked at one of those back in the 80s, so hydrocarbons and stuff like that. This one would show way more hydrocarbons than this cylinder would. But because it didn't burn all the fuel, and this cylinder get probably as hot as that one, this one tend not to get spark knock or pinging, whatever you want to call it. It was less apt to happen with this head. This one, while it burns better and burns most of the fuel, or all the fuel, the cylinder gets hot and it tends to ping if the compression ratio is too high for it. So that's what did away, that's kind of what hurt some of these earlier motors. They had these closed chamber heads. That's why Ford and Chevy got away from them. I'm sure Mopar and whatever all got away from these closed chamber heads because of the emission standards of 72. Matter of fact, the 72 429 460 heads are junk. It's one of the things I'm fearful of, this 2-barrel head. I haven't seen anything too bad yet. Like I say, if I stay around 9.5 to 1, I think I'll be fine. Because this is very similar to me. This is very similar to the 72 head for the 429 and 460. So I don't want to put a motor together that's going to be pinging, and I got to mix fuel or get into screwing around with that. So, but one of the things Ford did in 73 is they kind of went back to this design, is my understanding. I got a set. I haven't had them off the motor yet. I'll be curious to see what it looks like. But my understanding is the 73 heads off the 460 or 429. They went back to this kind of like a heart shape, whatever you want to call it, design. And what they did is they recessed the valve. This is open more, it's deeper. So this would be, say, a 64 cc head. The D3 is more like a 90 cc head, so the compression was still low. However, the way it burned, it was less apt to ping or knock or be as sensitive to it, is my understanding. So anyway, I want to show you that, because this one here is a 74 barrel head. I mean, look at the size of the intake valves on this thing. These things are huge. And then the ports, let's see, that's exhaust, and then there's your intake port versus, we'll do it like that, so you can see the 2-barrel intake port versus this monster. You know, these things flow way more than the 2-barrel ones. But this motor I'm putting together is mostly for driving around town, you know, so I'm not gonna be turning that thing no $7,000 or going drag racing with it per se. But I do want it to perform halfway decent. As long as I gotta buy pistons, we might as well get what we want. So now we'll come over to here, and then we'll end this thing. So here's our black. I got it cleaned up. You got a bug on there? I got it cleaned up. I had it line board, decked, brass freeze plugs, new cam bearings. It's gonna be upside down, right? Yeah, it's upside down. But right here is, the paint kind of filled it in a little bit. It's D2, so 72 block. But yeah, let's see if we come over here. So I mean, it came out really nice and everything. I oiled it all up, painted it up and stuff. But what I'm getting at as far as, here's our crank right here. So basically, in relation to the crank up through the bore up here into the cylinder, you want it there. It should be like V90, but it's, what I want to get at is that when these were made, and you get what you call core shift, so the block might turn a little bit. It's minor, but still. So in other words, in relation to the crank, when these were bored from the factory, this hole could be a little bit further, say that way or that way. All of these could be off a little bit from where they're exactly supposed to be. So that's what I mean by line boring it. They go off the center of the crank, and they will actually bore or hone these holes exactly where they're supposed to be. Okay, then the deck. So I got a 460 block, 429, 460, same block, but I've got one that's been line bored and decked. That one was 11 thousandths off. I didn't ask on this one. So in other words, the front of the block to the back of the block, as I recall on that one, this side was 11 thousandths lower than this side. So when he cut the deck, you know, he took, say, 11 thousandths more off this side, so that this ended up being flat in relation to every piston. It's almost like, so like when you're measuring the deck height, right? It's almost like, well, this piston sits down, let's see, if it was 11 thousandths higher on that, lower on that side. So this piston sits up a little higher in the deck than this piston back here. If this was 11 thousandths lower, that's a big difference. But now I know what this is. This has been machined. It's 13 thousandths. So when the piston's in here, there's a little exaggeration, but where my fingernail is, say it's 13 thousandths below the top of the deck. One thing I forgot to mention on that is the, what was it? I was measuring the deck. Oh, it sounds crazy, but when you cut the deck down, you cut the head down, the two become closer to each other. For whatever reason, and I think it's because of your burn area is now smaller, they tend to have less chance of pinging than, say, we left this deck original and left the head original, and you had, I don't know, 29 thousandths in the hole, don't touch the head. That would be more apt to ping than by cutting this deck down, cutting the head down. The two are closer to each other. You have a less combustion area while it raises up the compression at the same time. It's less chance that it'll ping. It makes sense in theory if you're making the chamber smaller. So, they say you put the 351M and the 400 together, and up against the Cleveland, they look pretty much the same. But if you look at the separation here, this is the back of our block, so this would be where the bell housing goes. If you look, I should grab my tape. I think I got one right here. Let's see here. So this is roughly, if you went center to center, is roughly, we'll call it about 5 inches from the center of each bolt. This transmission right here is for a 429, 460, 351M, or a 400. Okay, you'll see the difference. This one's like 7 3/4 from center to center. So quite a bit wider on that. Why Ford couldn't be like Chevy and leave all of them the same, so I could bolt a 302 up to this if I wanted, or a 351 Cleveland, or a 400M motor, or 460, like Chevy did with the turbo 350s, 400s, and whatever. I don't know. I really don't know what the reasoning was for that. But I still love them. I'm sure I'm always going to be a Ford guy. And as long as you got the knowledge of what you got to do, it's not as bad. But anyway, so I think I'll end it off here. I see we're approaching an hour. I hope this helps some guys out. If you're a backyard mechanic and you're wanting to build a 302 or whatever the case may be, and you're trying to figure out compression ratio, because the last thing you want to do is put a motor together, put super unleaded in it, and the thing pings like a mother all day, you're going to be pretty unhappy. So you can call them machine shop, talk to your best friends and maybe the guy down at the garage, but it's really not too hard to figure it out and get you in the ballpark of what you need to do. Now, whether I'm going to do a video on building this or not, I don't think I'm going to. Something tells me I'll see how much hot water I'm in for just talking about this. I mean, I love when you guys comment and stuff like that, don't get me wrong. And actually, someone can maybe say, oh, well, actually this, that, or the other thing, and might be something I don't know about. I'm always willing to learn. I just notice sometimes you get a lot of people who will contradict what you're doing, and I just soon put the thing together and avoid all that. I'm sure you've seen plenty of motors get put together. So at any rate, I think I got just about everything for this except for the bearings, rod bearings, crank bearings. I gotta get the rear seal. I gotta get the pistons, which I might be ordering this weekend. I'm not sure yet. and then I should be able to put this motor together. So then it's gonna have to go into the Cougar over here. So which this video didn't do that great. I was really surprised, but anyway, it's gonna go in this car here, and then we can get this one running, get the brakes going, and then see where we are in September, and hopefully maybe make it out to that Ford Fest thing. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. I should say I hope you enjoyed the video. Hopefully it was helpful, and we'll see you on the next one, guys. Take care. Bye.